Okay, maybe we just start today. So welcome to our class on Kant's Doctrine of Virtue today. And the topic today will be the introduction to the Doctrine of Virtue, which was, the metaphysics of morals has two parts, but originally both parts were published separately. So that this introduction is an introduction to a separate book, so to speak. At first, the first paragraph is quite easy to understand because he just talks about the meaning of the concept ethics, but actually the English has a problem that in German there exist more expressions for ethics than in English. You see, in German you have ethics, which comes from the Greek ethos, like the English one. And you have moral philosophy, philosophia moralis, which comes from the Latin mores, which is to say the way people behave or whatever. And there is the German moral philosophy, which is more or less a translation of mores. Mores, moral, philosophy. Philosophy of about how people behave, so to speak. Because it's philosophy, it's a theory, so to speak. And this is equivalent to the word ethics. Ethics or moral philosophy are equivalent, so to speak. And you find today some authors who claim that there is a difference, and the most important one might be Habermas. Habermas claims that there's a difference between ethics and moral philosophy in terms of moral philosophy is about the general, about the right, of what is right, and ethics is about the good. So people might share local concepts about what is good, and that's fine with him, but moral philosophy is about different ways of local conceptions of the good. So ethics is maybe what's going on in Belo Horizonte or in Brazil or in South America, or with the Catholic community or Jewish or Arabian or German or whatever one, and moral philosophy is about the rules which apply to everybody. But this is not the way Kant uses these words actually. He says, well, they are both identical. And then he introduces another word, which is Sittenlehre. And Sittenlehre is the translation of Latin mores, because mores, which is a moral philosophy, regards Sitten. Sitten means the ways in which people actually behave. Sitten, what's in Portuguese? Habitus, yeah, something like that. So Sittenlehre is the same as moral philosophy or ethics. And I just mentioned it because you find in the first two sentences 2 times the word ethics in the first one in German in both cases it's Sittenlehre, it's not ethics. You see. So whatever. There are books in German which in their title have the word Sittenlehre. For instance, a book by Meyer, it's Philosophische Sittenlehre and so on and so forth. And the question is why Kant didn't take this concept. Why didn't he talking about the doctrine of Sittenlehre? Why does he choose the concept of virtue? So that might be a topic of discussion for people which would like to go into more detail. So to speak, it's not our topic because it's more complicated. We have to read other texts. And sometimes you find a distinction. I think it's in Meyer as well, and involve it's rudimentary there, so to speak. It's the idea that you have to distinguish between a general theory of about what is good and bad, or what is your duty and what are virtues and vices, and then you become more specific. And then you go into the details and discuss the specific duties you have against yourself, against the others, and against God. And then this part, the specific part, is called Sittenlehre. You see, so you have sometimes this kind of differentiation between something which is more general and then a book about applied ethics, you might call that. And in Kant's groundwork, for instance, you find both endeavors mixed up, because he derives certain duties from the application of the categorical imperative to the maxims and so on and so forth. And that really belonged more maybe to what today is called applied ethics. It doesn't belong to the theory. And even in the groundwork it says, well, I just mentioned how it works here, how we can derive duties and so on and so forth, but I'm not claiming that this is systematically done here or that it is complete. I will do that later on. But he never did. Not even here in this Doctrine of Virtue. So anyway, you can write another book about just the first 3 or 4 sentences to make up your mind. Why does he choose one expression and not the other one, and what does it mean for the Germans of his time, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so in general he distinguishes between 2 meanings of ethics. The one is ethics means everything related to human free action, so to speak, and the other one is ethics without the doctrine of right. This is a big ethic, so to speak. Ethic means virtue and right, and the small ethics is that the theory of virtue is identical with ethics. So now he's talking about ethics in the narrower sense of the word in this book. And there's a standard Philosophia Moralis. What means Philosophia Moralis? Philosophia Moralis to most people at that time means actions which have a relation to the freedom of human beings. So there are 2 types of actions, of behavior, says it that way. One kind of human behavior is called action, and the other one of behavior is just called behavior, so to speak. For instance, if I eat something or drink something, then something happens with me, or if I'm asleep, then I move, and my body moves in space and time, but this is just behavior. It's not action in the narrow sense of the word. Because what? Because I'm not acting on representations, I'm not acting on reasons. So if the word moral is used, it just means, has a relation to human freedom. Whatever freedom means, if it is Kantian freedom or Wolffian freedom or Kraussian freedom, it just means freedom. So people share the same conception about the relation between moral and freedom, but they disagree, of course, about the concept of freedom and what it is all about. But that's about freedom, it's for sure, so to speak. For instance, if you're interested in Georg Friedrich Meyer has written a Philosophische Sittenlehre, book 1, paragraph C, he discusses all these distinctions before Kant, and Kant might have known that, and so on and so forth. Okay, so maybe we start with the Roman 1, discussion of the concept of a doctrine of virtue. So now he introduces something into the discussion which is intended to clarify to the reader what the reader might expect in the following. What do you think? And I mean, it's for us it's a little complicated, because he all the time tries to distinguish and make clear to the reader what's the difference between virtue and right is. And in general, the concept of right just applies to external actions and to specific law giving meant to determine the way in which human beings are allowed, that is to say, have the right to make use of their external freedoms. And it always comes with external sanction. But the sanction is justified through the categorical imperative and freedom and so on and so forth. So it's a different topic. So if you read, for instance, the first sentence, So I read the first sentence of Roman 1, discussion of the concept of the doctrine of virtue. And imagine you being a Wolffian, having studied it, I don't know, Heiner, Leipzig, and then you read this sentence. The very concept of duty is already the concept of a necessitation, constraint, or free choice through the law. What would you say? 99 question. What would you say? What's wrong? I give you a clue. What's wrong with this sentence from your Wolffian Leibnizian perspective?
I don't know, how can be a necessitation if we are free?
Not too bad, not too bad. Yeah, that's the point. He's talking, it's not necessity, because Wolf would say necessity is not the problem, but necessitation. There is no necessitation for somebody who's rational. So if you are rational, then there is a necessity, because you follow your good reasons. And the law gives you, the natural law gives you good reasons. And if you have good reasons, you, with necessity, follow the moral law. But Kant claims that the moral law always comes with necessitation. And necessitation means nötigung. So somebody, it belongs to the concept of duty that there is some constraint going on, that there's something, some conflict between something. And this idea of conflict and of somebody trying to make you do something, it doesn't belong to the Wolffian conception of duty. And in Kant, it's pure reason necessitates you to act out of respect of the moral law. So even the first sentence is very much discussed and taken into question at that time. And this is a typical expression of Kant to define duty or obligation not just with necessity, but with necessitation. And this concept actually stems from Leibniz. Okay, and then he distinguishes between external constraint and self-constraint. And external constraint regards the doctrine of right, and internal constraint is about ethics in the narrow sense of the word. So wherever we talk about moral duties and moral obligation in terms of ethics or virtue, we are talking about a self-relation which has to be described through the concept of constraint. You have to do something against yourself, so to speak. You have to be strong against something which you find in yourself. The enemy is not outside, that might be the case in the juridical field, but it's inside yourself. You have to work, you have to. So the moral imperative makes this constraint known, so you know through the consciousness of the categorical imperative that you have some duties. Through the categorical nature of its pronouncement, the unconditional ought. So the unconditional ought means you cannot ask why you should do what is morally good, because pure reason tells you to do so. You cannot ask why in terms of, will I be happy afterwards or not? So because of that, there's no relation here to the highest good as well. So the question of pure reason at the beginning is not what will be the result, what may I hope for, but what shall I do? You remember, Kant distinguishes between 4 different basic questions. In the Critic of Pure Reason, it's 3. At other places, he distinguishes 4. He says, what can I know? What shall I do? And what may I hope? And then the 4th one, what is human being? The difference between the question, what shall I do, or shall I do? So should I do, or ought, shall, or should I do, and what may I hope is that the hope question is something which presupposes that there is an answer already given to the question, what shall I do? So only after you have understood the answer to the question, what shall I do, or what should I do, can I ask the question, what may I hope? That is to say, you cannot introduce, for instance, the concept of God as a postulate, as a precondition for answering the question, what shall I do? But it only follows. And at some places he argues that we would be desperate without finding an answer to the question that may I hope, but we can act morally anyway, without hope, so to speak.
Heiner, why do you think Kant replied the third question in his moral philosophy or in the third critique?
Maybe in both. Maybe in both. So it's not one clear place where you can find a chapter. Now I'm writing on the question, what may I hope? It's in the postulate, in the second critique. There are passages in the first critique which go in this direction, the theory of the highest good. So Schopenhauer is wrong in claiming that Kant wrote the second critique just to make a favor to his servant, because he always wanted to have some offspring of acting morally and so on and so forth. And it's already in the third critique, because in the third critique, beside others, he says, well, we may hope that the highest good might be realized already in this world, with the harmony between aesthetics and moral philosophy and so on and so forth. So we can give an interpretation of nature as being not only beauty, but also as being a place which is in favor of our freedom. The free play between our faculties of imagination and understanding, so to speak, is a free play. It's strange that he uses the predicate free with regard to the relation in which the faculties are. I ask my students, what has this to do with freedom? Freedom always comes with the will. And now he introduces something which, as being free, which has no relation to the will at all, which means not determined by nature, although it is stipulated by nature. That means nature is being judged of as being a place in which something is to be, that there is a space for acting morally, so to speak. If nature allows me to judge of nature aesthetically as being not me determining, like the Newtonians law do, then I may hope that I can, so to speak, introduce full freedom into this world. There is the idea, there was some papers about it, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. Anderson Gold, I think, was the first one I personally read about that. So maybe there was a shift in Kant, not that he didn't took his highest good postulate seriously any longer in the 1790s, he took that serious, but he saw that maybe there is an additional place for hope, so to speak. And there is even another place, so to speak, which has a relation to this question, and that is the philosophy of law. Because what, so to speak, it's not just hope, it's, what do you want to reach? You want to reach a situation in which you can make full use of your freedom. And then Kant claims, is what you regard as being the most important thing to you. It's not happiness, so to speak, as he claims in the postulates with the highest good. In these anthropology lectures and elsewhere, he claims what is even more important for me is that my freedom that I can realize myself as a free subject in the world. And political philosophy and the philosophy of right describes the preconditions under which we as human beings not only can realize our virtuous actions, so to speak, but our external freedom. So in a Republican, liberal state combined with some Hobbesian elements, so to speak, we can hope to find a place in which we can find our freedom and institutions which allow us to cultivate ourselves. Good schools, good universities, the economics are doing maybe well, that's not one of Kant's favorite topics, obviously. But so the question, what may I hope, has not only a transcendent
But
meaning,
a better
but
world.
a better world. It's a better world. And there's clearly, I remember I read 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, a passage in which he criticizes some Swiss philosophers. And some Swiss philosophers said, oh, well, we have to be patriots. We have to look at the well-being of our country. And that's what is important, so to speak. And Kant says, okay, it's fine if you look on the well-being of your country, but you have the duty to look at the well-being of the world. You have to take up a cosmopolitan standpoint. And if you read one of these paragraphs, maybe we'll have time to look at what he's saying about our duty to promote the happiness of others, he claims the subjective, not the objective, the subjective ends of other people should be as important to you as your own subjective. You have the duty to promote the subjective ends other people take for earnest just because they believe their happiness belongs on that. So although I'm not in favor maybe for French literature, and maybe one of my girls in the future will like to be specified in French literature, I have the duty to make it possible for them to get good knowledge in French literature. Maybe I hate French literature, but I have to take steps that they have the opportunity to do so. So Kant says subjective ends are very important, because without them you cannot act and you will not make your way in this life and so on, but he also claims that the subjective ends of the others should be taken as earnest as your own one, in some degree, so to speak. And therefore, there's only a wide obligation as against the duties to promote the happiness of others. And it's a trick one. And you find similar arguments in Wolf as well. Wolf says, you have the duty to promote the well-being of strangers. You have the duty to do that, within certain limits, of course. You shouldn't promote the well-being of strangers or people coming from abroad, even he argues, not so far that it will destroy your own way of living and so on and so forth, but there is, as much as you can, the obligation to promote that. Why do I have to tell that? 4 questions. Hope and duty. So there's a small answer to the question, what may I hope? And there is a larger one. And the larger one can abstract, not only regards, so to speak, the afterlife, but already, so to speak, the hope that in fulfilling our duties, we can add to the perfection of the world. And that we can do first in an aesthetic sense, and second in a political and juridical sense.
Yes, it's what I was wondering to, maybe the answer, I was wondering to answer this question in a political way. But you said that we can hope for a better world, not another world, but this world. Better. This world.
And you know, he has this argument about the importance of the French Revolution. He says, well, obviously killing the king and Robespierre, what the Jacobins did and so on is bad and so on and so forth. But there is the hope, the importance of the French Revolution, he argues in his last book,
the
conflict of the faculties, the conflict of the faculty. He says, well, the French Revolution has a certain impact on the people who look from outside on the French Revolution. And the idea is that the people looking from outside on the French Revolution is that they take an interest in what's going on there. It's not just an interest in terms of will the French invade our countries, as they did afterwards, by the way, and destroyed many things, but brought some good things as well. But anyway, don't mention the French. But in terms of their intentions, in terms of that people for the first time give to themselves the law. So self-determination in terms of the political field is something which people take an interest in, even in Prussia, he would say. He would say, nowadays, people in Prussia and in other countries, and that's what we hope and we can see, take an interest that their own country will be made possible the self-determination of the people. Not with a revolution, of course, but with reform. So the intelligentsia, the educated people will force the king, will force the emperor to start reforms which will end up in a state or in a political situation in which the people can regard the laws of the state as laws given by the people. And that's the idea of the French Revolution. So he says, the French Revolution will never be forgotten as an example, as an ideal of people governing themselves.
Progress. Humanity.
Yeah, it's a progress. Yeah, that's the idea. And we can hope, so to speak, that it will be happening in the future. And his argument is that nature, so to speak, supports that. And he thinks that if a nation once reached a situation in which the people give themselves the law, this situation will not be reversible. Doesn't seem to be historically true, but it's not proved historically. But he believes no. If you regard yourself to be a free moral person, you as a free moral person do not take interest in wars. He claims. This is against morality, so to speak. To find yourself to be in a situation in which you will be regarded as being just the means to the ends of somebody else. You will be killed, you will have hardships, and so on and so forth. He didn't, I shouldn't preach now, back to the doctrine of virtue. So, external and internal necessitation. Moral imperatives. And there's a smart expression you find in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th line of my book. Rational natural beings. We are rational natural beings. Vernünftige Naturwesen. So we are natural beings, but rational natural beings. So we are both. We are natural beings and we are rational. We are animals on the one side, and we are rational on the other side, because we have freedom. And then he talks self-constraint, he talks about obstacles, Hindernisse, like walking through the forest or walking through the jungle. There's something that's complicated. Maybe if we did it once or twice or fourth, then you will find the way easier. So after 30 years old, you are used to go this way, and it felt not so much to be a hardship, because it was being 20 years old or 21. And the next important thing is that he gives a definition of virtue. What is virtue all about? It's the paragraph starting with now the capacity. Do you have that?
Yes.
Now the capacity and considered resolve to withstand a strong but unjust opponent is fortitudo. And with respect to what opposes the moral disposition within us, virtue. So the part of the general doctrine of duties that brings inner rather than outer freedom under laws is the doctrine of virtue. So the idea is virtue is just the strength of your will in doing what your duty is, so to speak. Sounds a little bit like Stoic philosophy, being a strong man, having the power, standing to virtue, and so on and so forth. It's not that virtue. So in the next paragraph says, the doctrine of right deals only with the formal condition of outer freedom, that is with right. But ethics goes beyond this and provides a matter. Provides a matter, an object of free choice, an end of pure reason, that it presents as an end which is also objectively necessary. That is an end which, as far as men are concerned, is a duty to have. For since men's sensible inclinations tend them to ends, it's a matter of choice, that can be contrary to duty, law-giving reason can in turn check the influence only by a moral end set up against the ends of inclination, an end that must therefore be given a priori, independently of inclinations. So, and now my next $99 question is, what's the difference between this conception of end and the conception of end we were talking about yesterday with regard to the groundwork? Maybe you get $100. What's the difference?
Did I get half a dollar in the question before?
Sorry?
Did I get half a dollar in the question before?
Yeah, I got it. But in the Platonic world. A Platonic world. This is the smartest dollars. Nobody can catch it.
Yes.
It's just, it's ever with you. You never lose it. No inflation. What's the difference? And what function does the concept of an end has within a doctrine of virtue? Was it?
The end of yesterday was this one of pathological.
Okay, yes.
That precedes our action. And this one?
Yesterday we were distinguishing between two types of ends.
Yes.
The first one is pathological, resting on your inclination, subjective ends, and so on and so forth. And then he introduces another one, namely end in itself. So humanity being rational means that you exist as an end in itself. And this being an end in itself is the norm according to which you can judge about the morality of your subjective ends or not, in terms of the maxims. That pure reason itself presents as an end is not mentioned in the groundwork at all. And it's not clear here what that means, of course. If he means that pure reason presents an end in terms of that we understand ourselves as an end in itself, it seems to be something different here. It seems to be a third option. So the one idea is we exist as an end in itself, in the intelligible world, and we already are, and there are our subjective ends as human beings, and now something third comes in. Namely the idea that pure reason gives us certain ends which we have to promote. Remember, the end in itself is already there. That we have to promote something as being a duty stemming from pure reason, and the end stems from pure reason itself, is not expressed, to be cautious, in the groundwork. And he gives a reason why pure reason does so. And that's important. And you do not find that idea for sure in the book. What's the function? Why does pure reason do so? Why does pure reason give us certain ends which are duties at the same time?
Content.
Give a content, and what? There are contents you could claim. There is my subjective ends. And then I look at motive. He says, for since men's sensible inclinations attempt them to ends that can be contrary to duty, law-giving reason can in turn check their influence only by a moral end set up against the ends of inclinations. So it's a kind of battlefield. Here are the inclinations. Here are my subjective ends. killing my neighbor, becoming rich, eating food I didn't pay for, and so on and so forth. And then it seems to be not enough to know that I exist as an end in himself, and Patricia, Virginia, and everybody else as well. But pure reason does something in addition and presents us ends which have the function to make us being possible to fight against our subjective ends with success. So this is about, as one would say today, about the motifying function of pure reason. So to do our job good, pure reason has to give us some ends which are special, so to speak, which are not normal ends. Something special is going on.
We could say that there is a trip,
Incentive?
Progression, trip. I don't know Moroccan.
That would be if you connect the concept of pure reason with an incentive, Triebfeder,
Yes.
and say you have to understand the function of pure reason in analogy to a Trieb or Triebfeder incentive, and then you would contradict the concept of reason. And therefore he introduces in the next paragraph another concept which makes clear that pure reason is not giving us an incentive, because incentive means it works anyway. You see, incentive means like if you have a watch and then you have this, it works if you want or not. I have the incentive to eat and drink and to sleep and so on and so forth. I can't resist that. So it works. I can controlate it a little bit, but it works. That it works as an incentive, he makes this difference between incentive and motive. And motive being Bewegungsgrund. So it might be better to say that pure reason gives us something which functions as a Bewegungsgrund, so to speak. It makes it easier for us to do something. But what is missing, you find in the next paragraph, namely choice. That's important, and that makes it a difference to the concept of an end existing in itself. Because here, to make the end or the ends work, which are given by pure reason, you have to make a certain choice. If you do not make that choice, then the end doesn't work. Then pure reason has not the effect of being modifying us, so to speak. And therefore the whole conception of distinguishing between, say, reasons and motives in Kant doesn't work so easily. So our modern conception was very much influenced by Hobbes and Hume, but this seems to be more complicated, so to speak. It's not that easy to understand. So read the next paragraph. An end is
only one question before. Here, let's use the analogy with the 30 Newtonian law of action and reaction to define the concept of virtue. The concept of virtue.
Virtue, okay.
In the paragraph that begins with now the capacity compares with fortitude.
Yes.
And there are some things that make opposition to us, and the virtue is as if we react.
Yes.
The analogy is with action and reaction. Okay, there is something that makes opposition to us.
Okay.
You need to react to this.
Yes.
Something.
There's a power, and you have to have a counterpower.
A counterpower. My question is, what is this power in us that we have to react? Is it our inclinations?
Inclinations. Always inclinations. If it would be something else, then it wouldn't be not in your power of free choice to overcome it. So it would be some disorder of your brain, then it's not moral philosophy. It must be inclination. It must be desire. Because desire, inclination have a connection to freedom. Have a connection to, remember what I said yesterday about the relation maxims and inclinations. They incorporate, so to speak, a minimalistic level of rationality over it. So talking about inclinations mean that you have the capacity to form concepts about what's going on with your inclination. If it is something else, if you were driven, so to speak, because you were drunk or you have some cancer or whatever, then it's not. We are not in moral philosophy. Then we are in empirical psychology. We are in biology, medicine, whatever. And Kant is very clear about that. Not every deed done by a human being falls under the description of being free, but although it looks like it is. If some people, sometimes think people are behaving as come on, there must be something wrong inside. No, I'm joking. But sometimes you can say, well, there's a book just published by an American neuroscientist. I forgot her name. I read the first 40 pages, and she was doing neurophysics, whatever, and she was looking in our brains, and she can tell you what part of the brains are responsible for whatever is going on and so on. And actually, she became a cancer in her brain, and then from one day to the other, she loses certain abilities. At first, she couldn't see the right side of her body and so on and so forth. So things are changing. And afterwards, she was healed, it was fine, and so on and so forth. And she described from her perspective, being a neuroscientist, what was going on. And she knew, now this is happening, and so on and so forth. And from a certain point on, you are a different person, so to speak. And Kant would say, you are then not any longer a person. Maybe you are a person, of course you are a person, intelligible world, and so on and so forth, but you are not any longer in use of your freedom. Because, so to speak, there are obstacles as against using your free will, which are not in your power to overcome. Physical obstacles. This is so the Kantian idea. And this power and counter power, this model comes in the end from Greek philosophy also. So this general idea of this is the opposite of the Aristotelian conception of virtue, of course. It's associated, say, with Stoic philosophy. But only this model. It's not the details of what Kant talks here about virtue, but the model that is struggling and you have to be strong and so on and so forth. Comes with the Greek and some Roman philosophers, like Cicero, as he is called. Okay. Okay, what go back to pure reason and that pure reason is smart to us. It gives us some ends which make it possible for us to do what pure reason demands us to do. So pure reason takes care of us, so to speak. No, pure reason takes what? She takes care of herself. Because pure reason wants pure reason to be realized in the world. So there is the idea that because we human beings take our freedom and autonomy and so on so value it so much, we find in our reason also the means to realize reason in the world. That's the idea in Baha'u'llah. Okay, but what you need here now is choice. There is a certain relation between your power of choice, let's see in German, this is Wille, Willkür, yeah. Willkür. This power of choice means Willkür. You remember Willkür at the talk yesterday? And he says here, of a rational being. So it's not the power of choice of an animal, because there's a power of choices of animals as well. It's called arbitrium liberum sensitivum in the Latin terminology of the metaphysics of the day. And in the German, the human ones is arbitrium liberum, just arbitrium liberum, intellectualis or something. An end is an object of the choice through the representation of which choice is determined to an action to bring this object about. You are acting on the representation of something. Yes. Now I can indeed be constrained by others to perform actions that are directed as means to an end. Of course, somebody could come in and force me to do something. Move my body in a certain way, because they are stronger than me, unfortunately, or they have a gun or whatever. But I can never be constrained by others to have ends. Only I myself can make something my end. Why is this? Why isn't it possible that somebody else can constrain me to have an end? Einen Zweck zu haben. Einen Zweck zu haben. Only I can myself make something mine. Why is it so?
Something can enter inside
Yes,
us.
of course. Yeah. Nobody can force you to have certain intentions. Maybe they can with drugs today, or with some brain surgery, whatever. Then, lobotomia is called, and somebody goes into your brain. And from tomorrow on, this is an example Philippa Foot gives. You like to play children games the whole day through, and you are lucky with that. So there might be, but then it's obviously not something which you yourself has made as an act. You are not acting on representations of act, but somebody else is, so to speak, manipulated you to do so. So the idea is nobody can force you to have a good will. Nobody can force you to have certain intentions. Yeah, that's the point. So to have an end means that you yourself decided to have this end, to act on this end. So you need some sort of freedom connected with the end, given by pure reason, to make this end effective in the way pure reason wants this end to be effective for you. That's the idea. And there's no way, no talk about that in the groundwork. There's just, things, thing in itself, end in itself, ends which are to be promoted, but it doesn't talk this way. But if I'm under obligation to make my end something that lies in concepts of practical reason, and so to have, besides the formal determining ground of choice, a material one as well, an end that could be set against the end arising from sensible impulses, this would be a concept of an end that is itself a duty. Nowhere does Kant refer to the concept of an end that is itself a duty before that. Maybe in some notes he took down, but not in his published works. An end which is at the same time a duty. And it goes, but the doctrine of this end would not belong to the doctrine of right. Of course, not always this topic right in virtue, this is something he's really cares about, but rather to ethics, since self-constraint in accordance with moral laws belongs to the concept of ethics alone. For this reason, ethics can also be defined as a system of the ends of pure practical reason. It's a system of ends of pure practical reason. Okay, I think this is actually maybe what is important of Roman 2. Then he asks at the end, how is such an end possible? So he says that if the story of morality shall be successful, then we need to imagine pure reason providing us ends which to promote our duties, otherwise we wouldn't be strong enough, don't be virtuous enough to win the war against our subjective ends stemming from inclination, something like that. So discussion of the concept of an end that is also a duty. By the way, just a footnote. If you look at the footnote, the less there you find something he gave up in his other works, namely the idea of freedom coming in degrees. So on the level of virtue, it is reintroduced by Kant again. So much, the more free we are, the more virtuous we are, something like that. Or the more virtuous we are, the more free we are. So anyway. What's going on in the second subsection? Anything new in it? I'm not sure. Well, actually, he introduces here the concept of a maxim. And we will see afterwards that the duty, that the end, which is at the same time a duty, will lead us to a certain maxim. And this maxim doesn't appear before as well. It's a maxim of duty, so to speak. And at the beginning of this subsection, he tries to want people to understand that the concept of maxim has two different relations to concrete actions, as it depends on whether you are talking about the philosophy, the doctrine of right or the doctrine of virtue. He says one can think of the relation of end to duty in two ways. One can begin with the end and seek out the maxim of actions in conformity with duty, or on the other hand, one can begin with the maxim of actions in conformity with duty and seek out the end that is also a duty. The doctrine of right takes the first way. What end anyone wants to set for his action is left to his free choice. The maxim of the action, however, is determined a priori, namely that the freedom of the agent could coexist with the freedom of every other in accordance with the universal law. Okay, that regards the doctrine of right. Whatever that means, we don't care about that. We care about the next paragraph. But ethics takes the opposite way. It cannot begin with the ends that a man may set for himself, and in accordance with them prescribes the maxim he is to adopt, that is his duty. For that would be to adopt maxims on empirical grounds. And such grounds yield no concept of duty, since this concept has its root in pure reason alone. Consequently, if maxims were to be adopted on the basis of those ends, one could not really speak of the concept of duty. Hence, in ethics, the concept of duty will lead to ends and will have to establish maxims with respect to ends we ought to set ourselves, grounding them in accordance with moral principles. What does it mean? Hard to understand. So what he says is, if we are looking for moral maxims, we cannot start with the ends which rest on our inclinations. Because if we would start with inclinations and then find the ends, we are looking, which are incorporated in inclinations, then we will only have empirical maxims. Therefore, we must start a different way. We must start with the concept of duty and see what ends will be the result of duty, and then we have ends which are at the same time duties, and then from this starting point we will find a maxim which is a maxim of pure practical reason, something like this. It seems to be rather scholastic. I don't know. It's not that very good. Setting aside the question of what sort of end is in duty a duty, is in itself a duty, and how such an end is possible, we have here only to show that a duty of this kind is called a duty of virtue, and what it is called, and why it is called by this name. So why, and that's the next paragraph. To every duty there corresponds a right in the sense of an authorization to do something. So right, what means right in Kant? Freedom, power. So right just means freedom. But it is not the case that to every duty there corresponds and rights of another to coerce someone. Instead, such duties are called specifically duties of right. Similarly, to every ethical obligation there corresponds the concept of virtue. But not all ethical duties are thereby duties of virtue. Those duties that have to do not so much with a certain end, matter, object of choice, as merely with what is formal in the moral determination of the will, are not duties of virtue. Only an end that is also a duty can be called a duty of virtue. So what is he trying to say here? He's trying to say that there are many duties, but not every duty is a duty of virtue. So the idea seems to be that on the one side, you can follow the formal procedure of the groundwork. You have maxims on the basis of inclinations, and then you look whether or not the maxim qualifies as a universal law. And if it qualifies as a universal law, then you can deduce certain duties, that is to say actions which we have a duty to fulfill, so to speak. Okay, that's fine. But these are in general not duties of virtue. Duties of virtue are specified in a certain way, namely that the formal procedure is not enough, but that with regard to some duties, these duties rest on an end which is given by pure reason itself. So you have the class of all duties, and only a couple of those duties are duties of virtue, whatever that means. Sorry that it is a bit tedious here, but I didn't wrote it. And then there is a remark, forget the remark, I would say. Maybe it's more interesting to go to Romans 3. On the basis for thinking of an end that is also a duty. So you see, it's not really well written, I must say. It's not well written. There are passages in it, and you ask yourself, why does it do so? Or you might be skeptical about the order of argumentation. Maybe it might have been a better idea to put Romans 3 directly after Romans 1, whatever. So it's not really well composed. So, but we are now interested in knowing why we should think of an end which is at the same time a duty. And he writes, an end is an object of free choice. Yeah, so that's what we know. The representation of which determines it to an action. Every action therefore has its end. Yeah, we know that. And since no one can have an end without himself making the object of his choice into an end, that's what he was talking about 10 minutes before, to have any end to action whatsoever is an act of freedom on the part of the acting subject, not an effect of action. So here a new conception So here he introduces freedom, namely freedom connected with the power of choice. He says, whatever end is the object of your activity is chosen by yourself. There are no ends you are acting on which are not the object of your free choice. That is to say, neither the ends stemming from inclination nor the end from pure reason. Both, you have to do something to make ends effective. So although pure reason gives you an end and makes it a duty for you to promote this end, you will not promote this end if you do not want to do so. You have to want it. But because this act that determines an end is a practical principle that prescribes the end itself, not the means, it is a categorical imperative of pure reason, and therefore an imperative which connects the concept of duty with that of an end in general. Okay. And now comes an argument which he might have introduced before as well. He says, now there must be such an end and a categorical imperative corresponding to it, for since there are free actions, there must also be ends to which, as their objects, these actions are directed. But among these ends, there must be some that are also, that is to say, by their concept, duties. Why should that be so? Why should there be ends which are at the same time duties? If it is possible to talk about maxims, which are maxims incorporating subjective ends, and then looking at the form of the maxims, and then you know which ends are allowed to be ends of your moral striving. Why should there be some special ends? He says, for where there are no such ends, then all ends would hold for practical reason only as means to other ends. And since there can be no action without an end, a categorical imperative would be impossible. This would do away with any doctrine of morals. So here, this is the second argument. The first argument was, if pure practical reason does not give us ends which are at the same time duties, we wouldn't be strong enough to fight against, win against the ends stemming from our sensibility. And now he says, without those ends there would be no categorical imperative. That is not about moral motivation, this is about normativity, so to speak. There would be no unconditional obligations. Why not? Because if it is true that every action has an end, and if it were be the case that all ends were given by our sensibility, then there would be no ends which are ends given by pure reason. And if there were no ends given by pure reason, there were no ends which we have the duty to promote. Therefore, all ends would be just subjective. But I don't understand, or the reader might not understand, why pure reason should give these ends, because you could have a just formal perspective on your maxims and your ends, as I said before. Here are your subjective maxims, and in your subjective maxims you have subjective ends, and then the categorical imperative comes in and asks you whether or not the form of the maxim corresponds to universal law, and if it does, then you are allowed to to promote your subjective ends, which are part of the subjective maxim. So why should it be that you, above that, need to have certain ends which directly have their origin in pure reason? That's not clear here. He argues this way, but it doesn't become clear here. So anyway, he could have argued, well, dear reader, I want to present to you two different arguments. The first one is, as I mentioned, without these ends, you wouldn't be strong enough to fight against your sensibility, and dear reader, remember, without these ends, which have the origin in pure reason, there would be no categorical imperative, but it doesn't do so. So it's not, I would say, not written. You find the arguments in between the text, so to speak.
It's very difficult to be a human being.
You are asking for a break, don't you? Let's take a break. Yeah, the next paragraph is, what are the ends that are also duties? Now flesh comes in, so to speak. Now we are asking questions, thinking about ends. Now he gives the meat into the debate, so to speak. Okay, maybe after. Meat comes after the break. Or potatoes.